Hello, everyone. Welcome to the lectures of this self-knowledge course. Today we will study Lecture 17 of Phase B, where we will complete our study of Dante's circles. We will continue examining the process of involution, the journey of souls through the region known as the Tritocosmos. Ready to begin a new cycle, another turn of the wheel of samsara. In the previous lecture, we studied the first part of the involutionary process. We examined circles 1 through 5, where we saw the punishments experienced by the lazy, the fornicators, those enslaved by pleasures and sufferings, the greedy, and the angry. These first circles share one important characteristic. They are the destination of those whose faults are primarily instinctive. These are mistakes that even an animal can commit. Animals fornicate, seek pleasure, display greed, and become angry. However, in the circles we will study today, the condemned face much harsher judgments because their faults are intellectual in nature and therefore involve a greater degree of perversity. Likewise, the number of laws, the density of matter, and the intensity of suffering increase in a truly frightening way. The sixth circle is the submerged sphere of Jupiter. Jupiter is known as the great giver of the solar system, representing generosity and altruism. In complete contrast, this circle is inhabited by tyrants, hoarders, atheists, and materialists. This region is governed by 3,072 laws. Here we find the selfish, the atheists, the materialists, the enemies of the eternal, the blasphemers, and those who hate everything that carries even the slightest fragrance of divinity. We also find the heretics, those who abandoned a spiritual group and later sought to destroy it through slander and scandal, along with the hoarders and the great tyrants. These include those who during life became dictators or exercised authority over many people and abused their power. They oppressed others while sincerely believing they were benefactors. This is one of the defining characteristics of the tyrant. They violate the rights of others while convincing themselves that they alone know what is best. But this circle is not reserved only for great tyrants. Here we also find the small tyrants, those who abused their authority over employees, and those misguided parents who, although convinced they are doing the right thing, make life miserable for their children. They force them to eat what they dislike, to study what they do not wish to study, attempt to impose religion through punishment or intimidation, or manipulate them psychologically. They may appear honest and sincere, yet they make their own homes a place of suffering. We also find those who appeared religious, or who aspired to self-realization, presenting themselves as exemplary before their spiritual brothers, while sowing fear and suffering within their own homes. In the Divine Comedy, Dante Alighieri tells us that the condemned in this circle lie among tombs surrounded by a sea of flames. These tombs symbolize the concepts, passions, hatreds, and limitations in which they imprison themselves throughout life. Time moves with terrifying slowness in this region. Every minute feels like centuries, making existence unbearably tedious and painful. The seventh circle is the submerged sphere of Saturn. This circle is governed by 6,144 laws. Here, the condemned undergo the involutionary process through the plant kingdom. Within this circle, we find all those who practiced violence. In the fifth circle, we encountered the angry, but their anger was instinctive and primitive. Here, however, violence takes on an intellectual character, becoming a deliberate force that seeks to destroy and profane everything that is sacred. Here we find those who were violent against God, individuals who, out of arrogance and pride, blasphemed against what they themselves recognized as the superior, the divine. They disobeyed their own being, rejected divinity, and believed they could exist without divine grace. We also find those who were violent against the Holy Spirit and against art. In other words, those who violated the sacred laws governing sexual energy and sexual practice. This includes those who engaged in practices that distorted the sacredness of sexuality, such as oral sex, anal sex, masturbation, pornography, homosexuality, bestiality, pedophilia, necrophilia, and other forms of sexual degeneration. Also found here are those who used violence within sexual relationships, forcing or manipulating their partners into sexual activity against their will, or even forcing themselves to engage in sexual relations when they were not in the proper physical or psychological condition. Likewise, this circle includes those who ignored the magnetic pauses, those who engaged in sexual relations during pregnancy, lactation, or the menstrual period, and those who failed to leave at least one day between sexual practices, instead engaging in them several times within the same day. Also present are the celibates, those who rejected sexuality altogether, the confirmed bachelors, and in general, all those who acted against the proper use of sex. Here we find both extremes, those who rejected sexuality and those who abused it. The punishment in this circle unfolds in an atmosphere of relentless violence, filled with blows, blood, and overwhelming centrifugal forces. There are rivers of boiling blood in which the violent suffer within the cauldron of their own blood, inflamed by the fire of anger. Whenever someone attempts to escape, they are pierced with arrows, forcing them to plunge back into the boiling blood once again. Meanwhile, those who were violent against God and against nature lie naked upon burning sand while an endless rain of fire falls upon them. They run desperately in every direction, unable to avoid the burning embers. This rain of fire symbolizes the very blasphemies and rejection they directed against the divine during their lives. Within this same circle, we also find those who were violent against other people and against their property, murderers, thieves, and all who harmed others through violence. Here, too, are those who were violent against nature, individuals who, for pleasure or convenience, corrupted or destroyed what is natural by polluting rivers, the air, and the soil, or by adulterating food. This also includes those who castrated animals, also those who castrated themselves or had their partners castrated in order to continue fornicating without consequences. Violence against nature is also committed when a person violates their own natural constitution by attempting to change their sex. Finally, we find those who were violent against themselves, those who committed suicide, as well as those who harmed their own bodies in the pursuit of pleasure by continually consuming what was harmful or by deliberately starving themselves. Those who committed suicide fall into a dark forest, where they remain transformed into plants. Their branches are constantly torn apart by terrifying birds known as harpies, which symbolize all the justifications that led them to commit violence against themselves. Each time a branch is broken, they experience pain as though one of their own limbs were being torn from their body. The eighth circle is the submerged sphere of Uranus. This circle is governed by 12,288 laws. Within this submerged region begins the process of ossification, crystallization, mineralization, and the final destruction of the entire ego. Here dwell the liars, the falsifiers, and all those who acted against the truth. Among them are counterfeiters of money, false alchemists, false prophets, and false masters who deceived many people, leading them toward perdition by promising them heaven through lies. Here we also find those who practiced black tantrism and awakened the fire in a negative way. By developing the inverted serpent, they consciously awakened forces for evil. Even knowing that they must descend into the bowels of the earth and pass through the entire involutionary process until the second death before the purity of their psychic material can be restored, they do not repent of the path they chose. Instead, they transform their own involution and the fatal wheel of samsara into a religion, into a form of mysticism. In this region, the condemned are devoured by the dreadful python serpent, the negative aspect of the Divine Mother, whose mission is to destroy the ego, disintegrate it, and reduce it to cosmic dust, thereby liberating the essence imprisoned within it. The ego must always be dissolved, whether we willingly cooperate with the process or resist it. Sooner or later, the serpent must swallow us, either after a victorious inner work or after a life of failure. The ninth circle is the submerged sphere of Neptune. This circle is governed by 24,576 laws. It is here that the involutionary creatures undergo their final disintegration. This is the region where traitors are reduced to ashes. We must remember that every being who enters the involutionary path has, in one way or another, betrayed their own consciousness. There are many forms of betrayal, but some are so grave that they are punishable by death. In such cases, the traitor is immediately disincarnated, while the physical body continues to live under the control of a demon. The cosmic executioners carry out the sentence, and these unfortunate individuals are taken directly to the ninth Dante's circle. Yet their physical bodies do not die, because a demonic entity takes possession of them and remains within that body. This occurs so that the karmic processes of relatives and all those connected with such individuals are not disrupted or prematurely altered. As incredible as it may seem, there are many of these so-called living dead walking through the streets of our cities today. Their true owners already dwell in the infernal worlds. In this way, the judges of heavenly justice carry out the death sentence upon traitors. These beings are known as empty houses, bodies that continue to exist without consciousness. At the center of the ninth circle lies the well of the universe, the very center of planetary gravity. It is there that the entire ego is finally reduced to cosmic dust. It is important to remember that the ninth submerged sphere is also the region where the creative organs of the human species have their complete representation. No one can ascend without first having the courage to descend. Every exaltation is preceded by a profound and terrible humiliation. Descending into the ninth sphere is essential. Those who aspire to self-realization descend willingly during life, consciously entering the ninth sphere through inner work in order to achieve their intimate self-realization. The vast majority, however, descend unconsciously after death, entering the abyss of perdition through the involutionary process. The punishment in this region consists of being submerged in frozen wells until becoming completely encased in ice. There, at the point farthest from the sacred absolute sun, the cold is so intense that every last trace of the ego is eventually disintegrated. When the final breath of the ego has been extinguished, the essence, the psychic material, is finally liberated, free from the ego, which has now been completely reduced to cosmic dust. Once the essence has been liberated, it takes on the appearance of a beautiful child, radiant with purity and light. At that moment, the devas of nature examine the liberated essence. After confirming that it no longer contains any subjective elements, they grant it complete freedom. Once released upon the surface of our world, the essence begins a new evolutionary journey. It starts as a gnome or pygmy within the mineral kingdom. From there, it continues evolving through the plant and animal kingdoms until, one day in the distant future, it once again reaches the level of an intellectual humanoid, where it will receive a new opportunity to strive for self-realization. With this, we conclude our study of Dante's circles. The true purpose of this lecture is to help us appreciate the immense value of psychological death and to understand the importance of consciously and willingly eliminating each of our negative ways of being. Our next lecture will be Lecture 18 of Phase B, where we will study Theosophy, Spiritism, and Mediumship. There we will understand why these schools do not lead to the self-realization of the being. Remember to leave us any questions you may have. Thank you very much for your attention, and until next time.